She was lying face down in a ditch off Muskoka Road 10. Barely 20 meters from the tree. And if a man checking his trapline hadn't had his headlights angled at the wrong pitch at exactly the right moment, no one would have found her until morning. That is a fact I return to more than I should. This story is based on real events. Hello, friends? Set down whatever you are doing for a few minutes. I want to share something with you. Something I hope helps you see the people around you a little differently. Let us know in the comments where you are tuning in from tonight. I am 62 years old. My name is Gladys, and I was born and raised in Muskoka, in a clapboard house my grandfather built with his own hands on a quarter-acre off Brunel Road that our family has kept for 3 generations. My mother worked housekeeping at a resort for 23 years. My father drove for a lumber company. We were not people with connections or capital or cottages of our own, but I earned a social work degree from Laurentian University and spent 31 years with the Children's Aid Society of Simcoe, Muskoka. And I raised my daughter to know her own value without needing anyone else to confirm it. My husband died 7 years ago. Heart failure, quick, the way he would have chosen. I stayed in the old house because it is where I know how to breathe. I tend the garden. I take the kayak out on the river on good mornings. I visit my daughter when she will have me, and I try not to look too closely at the things she has learned to overlook. She had met my son-in-law at a professional conference in Toronto when she was 30 years old. She was a financial compliance analyst at a mid-sized firm downtown. Careful, detail work, the kind that requires you to notice when something does not add up. He was 36, charming in the way that people who have never been refused anything tend to be. His family had old Ontario money, the kind that has been accumulating quietly for several generations, and announces itself not with flashiness, but with a certain settled certainty. The right club memberships, a chalet in Collingwood, a summer property on Lake Rosso. The assumption, underneath everything, that the world will arrange itself around them without being asked. His mother ran a registered charity called the Northern Health Access Fund. She had been its founder and executive director for 12 years. The fund raised money for rural healthcare access across Northern Ontario, equipment for small hospitals, travel assistance for patients in remote communities who needed to reach specialists in Sudbury or Toronto. It was her public project. She was photographed with hospital administrators and provincial health ministers. She gave speeches at fundraising galas in Rosedale. She was the kind of woman who made generous people feel good about writing checks. The first time I met her, she looked at me the way you look at something you've accidentally tracked in on your boot. I said nothing. My daughter was happy, or I believed she was, or I decided to believe she was, because the alternative, that she had traded one kind of difficulty for another, more gilded kind, was not something I was ready to sit with. November in Muskoka turns gray early and hard. The tourists go home, the roads go quiet, the trees strip down to bare branches and brown fields, and the cold gets into your bones by mid-morning. It was a Thursday evening in mid-November, just past 7, when my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. I was in the kitchen. I nearly let it go to voicemail. "Are you the mother of?" And he said my daughter's name. My stomach dropped before he finished the sentence. He was a trapper, lived near Fairy Lake. He had been checking his line after dark when his headlights caught something pale on the ground just off the road shoulder. He had found her, called 911, searched her wallet for an emergency contact. The ambulance, he said, was at least 35 minutes out on those roads. He thought he should call a person first. I do not remember turning off the stove. The man was standing outside his truck with a headlamp when I pulled up. He was older, weathered, the kind of quiet that comes from spending most of a lifetime outdoors. He had draped his hunting jacket over my daughter's shoulders and gotten her sitting upright against the slope of the ditch, her back against a birch trunk. I have worked with children and families in crisis for 31 years. I have sat in rooms with people in the worst circumstances of their lives and kept my voice steady for their sake because they needed that more than I needed to react. There are things you learn when you do that kind of work, and you do not unlearn them. Looking at my daughter's face, her left eye swollen completely shut, blood dried along her jaw, her wool coat torn at the collar. I needed every one of those 31 years. I dropped to my knees in the wet leaves beside her. "Baby," I said. "Mom." Her voice came out ground and careful, like she was measuring each breath. I cupped her face gently and checked her pupils. I looked at her wrist, which was hanging at an angle I recognized immediately. I ran through everything I had been trained to look for, and I kept my voice level, and I said, "Who did this to you?" Not whether someone had, I already knew. She looked at me with her one open eye. "His mother," she said. She told me the rest in pieces, there in the dark, while the trapper gave us space, and the wind moved through the birches above us. 2 weeks before, she had been helping her husband sort through papers at the house. He had committee obligations for one of his mother's annual reports and had needed a second set of eyes. My daughter had a habit of attention she had developed over 10 years in financial compliance. She noticed things that other people filed past without reading. What she found, buried in a batch of bank statements, was a pattern. Consulting fees, large, regular, paid to a cluster of numbered companies. The fees were accompanied by contracts. The contracts were thin. When she looked up the companies in the provincial registry, 3 of them had been incorporated within the same May week, 4 years earlier. She had done what I wish, with everything in me, she had not done. She went directly to her mother-in-law, gave her the benefit of the doubt, told herself there might be an explanation she had not considered. His mother had listened carefully and said she didn't understand how these things worked, and suggested they drive up to the family property on the Skeleton Lake Road, where the relevant documents were kept, where she could explain everything properly, away from the house. My daughter had got in the car. "She hit me from behind," my daughter said. "Something from the trunk. I didn't see it coming." She swallowed slowly, and then she said, "Mom, I need you to know something. I'm 14 weeks. The world went very quiet. I looked at my daughter, who was 14 weeks pregnant with my first grandchild. And I thought about a woman in a good coat getting back into her vehicle and driving away down a logging road in November, leaving my daughter in the mud to manage the cold alone. 35 minutes for an ambulance. A November night, 14 weeks along. The trapper said behind me that the ETA was down to 20 minutes. I turned to my daughter. She was already shaking her head. "She's on the board of the hospital foundation in Huntsville," my daughter said quietly. "She knows people there. If I go in as an assault victim, it's a police matter. His family has connections in the OPP district office as well. She has known the district commander for years." I had seen, across 31 years of child welfare work, what happens when powerful families decide that inconvenient things should be managed quietly. I had seen it more times than I could count. I went to the trapper. I told him my daughter had a family matter that needed handling privately, that I had 30 years of first aid training and would take full responsibility for her care. He looked at me for a long time. He had the kind of face that has sized up a great many situations in its time. "All right," he said. "I'll tell the ambulance it was a misunderstanding." He paused. "You be careful now." "I will," I said. "Thank you." I got my daughter into the Escape and turned south on the highway and pulled over at the first gas station I found to use the payphone. My brother is 4 years younger than me. He spent 28 years with the Ontario Provincial Police, most of it in the financial crimes and major fraud unit out of the Orillia detachment. He is a man of few words and very precise judgment, and when I told him the short version in 2 minutes flat, he listened without making a sound. Then he said, Don't go home. They may know where you are. I wasn't planning to. Good. The cottage. Take the back road through Dorset. I'll meet you by midnight. He paused. Before you go anywhere, check under the wheel wells, both sides, front and back. I knew what he was asking. I had a flashlight in the glove box. I found it under the driver's side rear wheel well, small, black, magnetic, no bigger than a deck of cards. My son-in-law's family had had my car serviced at their mechanic 3 months prior. My son-in-law had insisted on it, said it was a favor, said the old Escape was overdue for a checkup. I left the tracker in the parking lot of the Tim Hortons in Dorset and drove the rest of the way to the cottage in the dark. The family cottage sits on a bay off Lake of Bays, at the end of a gravel road that becomes difficult in November and impassable by February. My grandfather built the main cabin. My father insulated it in the 80s. It is nothing grand: cedar siding, a cast iron wood stove, a kitchen with mismatched dishes, and 30 years of accumulated jigsaw puzzles stacked on the shelves. But the walls are thick and the wood stove throws good heat, and you cannot see the place from the road. I got my daughter settled on the old couch with a wool blanket and a hot water bottle and every analgesic in the first aid kit that I was confident was safe for her stage of pregnancy. I splinted her wrist with what I had on hand: a wooden spoon and 2 folded tea towels. I checked her for signs of internal bleeding, the things you learn in 30 years and do not unlearn. Her pupils had evened out. She was concussed, bruised badly across the ribs, exhausted and frightened. She was also angry in the quiet and purposeful way that has always been my daughter's particular version of strength. I took photographs, she said, around 11 o'clock, on my phone. Before she drove me out, I thought I might need to show someone. You will, I told her. My brother arrived at midnight. He came in without turning on lights, set 2 prepaid cell phones on the kitchen table, made himself a cup of tea, and sat across from my daughter and listened to everything from the beginning without interrupting once. When she finished, he said, "Give me 48 hours. My brother still has contacts in the OPP Financial Crimes Unit. He has contacts at the Canada Revenue Agency in the Charitable Sector Compliance Division. He spent 2 days on the burner cell and on an old laptop he had brought that he insisted remain offline. He drove into Huntsville once to use the public library computer. What he found confirmed what my daughter had suspected and added details she had not been able to see. The Northern Health Access Fund had processed over $4 million in the previous 3 years alone. A significant portion of its program expenditure had passed through those numbered companies and into accounts with no documented connection to health care in Northern Ontario. The companies were shells. The contracts were fabricated. It had been running, cleanly and carefully, for at least 3 years, and most likely longer. She was careful, my brother said, spreading printouts across the cottage table on the second evening. But not as careful as she thought. My daughter was sitting across from him, her splinted wrist resting on a folded towel, studying the page. She pointed to a line. That numbered company. I've seen that name before. On a document at the house. I thought it was a supplier. My brother said, "It's not." My daughter looked up at me. "There's something else," she said. "I didn't tell you all of it yet." 3 years before, she had been shortlisted for a senior position at a compliance firm in Toronto. The kind of position that would have changed the shape of her career, her own portfolio, her name moving forward, real financial independence. She had made it to the final round. 2 weeks before the decision was announced, the firm told her they had selected another candidate. She had been disappointed. She had let it go. She had told herself, as you do, that these things happen. "Last spring," she said, "I ran into a woman who would have been my direct supervisor at that firm. We had coffee. She told me there had been a call during the hiring process. A woman who identified herself as a former colleague. She said I had a conflict of interest on a client file. Said the matter had been resolved quietly, but They should know before making a final decision. There had been no such matter, no complaint, no conflict of any kind. My daughter's professional record was spotless. She gave me the name on their call log, my daughter said. It wasn't a colleague. It was a catering company. She looked at her hands for a moment. His mother uses that catering company for every fundraising gala she runs. The call came from their main line. She had been at an event there that same afternoon. The cottage went very quiet. Outside, the November wind moved off the lake through the pines. She wanted you dependent, I said. She wanted me to need them, my daughter said, so that if I ever thought about leaving, I would have nowhere to go. My brother said nothing for a long moment. Then, flatly, "All right, I think we have enough." My son-in-law's father was not the kind of man his wife was. I had met him perhaps 8 times across 4 years. A large, quiet man, whose stillness was a form of attention rather than absence. He had built a manufacturing company over decades, sold it, and now managed his investments and served on the boards of 2 hospital foundations. Different ones, legitimate ones, organizations whose books he had personally reviewed before lending his name. My daughter believed he knew nothing about what his wife had done with the Northern Health Access Fund, Accessfunds. His name appeared nowhere in its filings. He had declined to join its board when it was founded, for reasons that had never been fully explained. We made contact through a lawyer my brother had worked with during his OPP years. A woman in Barrie who had done criminal defense work for 30 years and had no reason to be impressed by anyone's family name. The message was simple. There was documented information about the Northern Health Access Fund, requiring his attention, and a family matter was also involved. He could meet with us privately, or the documentation would be forwarded to the CRA and the Ontario Securities Commission by end of week. He responded within 3 hours. He suggested a hotel meeting room in Barrie. Saturday morning, 9 o'clock. He was already seated when we arrived. He looked, if I am honest, like a man who had been expecting a version of this conversation for longer than he would admit. My brother laid the documents in front of him without commentary. He read financial statements the way other people read newspapers. Quickly, with complete comprehension. He went through every page without speaking. Then he said, "How long?" 3 years that we can document clearly, my brother said. Possibly longer. He set the papers down, my daughter-in-law. She's recovering, I said. She's 14 weeks pregnant. She found the discrepancy by accident while helping with a report. When she asked your wife about it, your wife drove her to a logging road north of Fairy Lake and left her there. In November, at night. He looked at me steadily, and my son. We haven't spoken to him, I said. We're not interested in your son. We're interested in my daughter's safety, and in the fact that real money was raised by real people for real patients who needed it. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I watched his coffee go cold on the table between us. Then he said, "What do you need?" We were not asking for money. My daughter would receive a proper settlement through the divorce, the matrimonial property in Toronto to be sold and divided fairly, with additional compensation for the professional opportunity that had been deliberately taken from her 3 years prior. We were not going to the press. We were not filing a criminal complaint, provided that a complete voluntary disclosure was made to the CRA regarding the fund's past activities. The fund was placed under independent governance, and his wife had no further contact with my daughter, ever. She won't agree to that easily, he said. She will, my brother said, when you explain to her what the other option looks like. He nodded slowly. His hands were flat on the table. My son, he said again, not quite a question, not quite anything else. Your son can figure out what kind of father he's capable of being, I said. That's between him and my daughter. It has nothing to do with this table. He was quiet once more. Then he extended his hand. 4 days, my brother said. 4 days, he agreed. His grip was firm and unhurried. He held my hand a moment longer than necessary and said, very quietly, "I'm sorry for what she did to your family. I am genuinely sorry." "I know," I said. "So am I." The voluntary disclosure package was filed with the CRA within the week. An independent administrator was appointed to the Northern Health Access Fund pending a full audit. The fund was wound down over the following months, its remaining assets transferred to a legitimate Northern Hospital Foundation, after a review confirmed they were clean. My son-in-law's mother resigned from all 3 of her charity boards on a Friday afternoon, citing health reasons. She was at her sister's property in Prince Edward Island by the end of the following week. The terms of the arrangement required her to remain there. She did. My daughter's lawyer, found through the Law Society Referral Service in Barrie, a woman who moved efficiently and had no interest in drama, handled the divorce. My son-in-law contested nothing. His father had spoken to him. Whatever was said in that conversation, I was not told, and I did not ask. My son-in-law sent my daughter one text message 10 days after the papers were signed. "I didn't know about the job. I want you to know that." She read it once, set the phone down, and said, "I believe him. I just don't think it matters anymore." I thought that was about right. His father called me once, roughly 2 months later. He knew of a small health foundation in Northern Ontario, a legitimate one, a good one, that was looking for a part-time financial compliance consultant. He thought my daughter should know the position was there when she was ready. No pressure, no strings. He just thought she should know. She took the contract 6 months after the baby arrived. She is very good at it. She still is. My granddaughter was born on a Thursday morning in early May, when the ice was off the lake and the Canada geese were back in the fields, and the sugar maples along Brunel Road were just beginning to put out their first leaves. I drove to the hospital in Barrie in the dark at 5 in the morning, with a bag of food and a blanket I had been knitting since December, and my brother was already in the waiting room when I arrived. We sat together for 6 hours. He told me about a loon he'd seen on the lake that morning. I pretended to read a magazine. We drank the terrible coffee from the machine in the hallway and said very little and waited. When the nurse came and said I could go in, I walked down that corridor and pushed open the door, and there was my daughter, pale and exhausted, and laughing at something a nurse had said, and in her arms was a small, red-faced, absolutely determined-looking person who had apparently arrived 2 weeks early and with no patience for further delay. 8 pounds, 1 ounce, the nurse said. She's perfect. My daughter looked up at me. I have a name. I sat on the edge of the bed. Tell me. She said the name. It was my mother's name. My mother, who cleaned guest rooms at a Muskoka resort for 23 years and raised 2 children on a shift worker's wage, and never once in her entire life suggested to anyone that she was less than exactly what she was. I held my granddaughter very carefully, the way you hold something irreplaceable, and I looked at her small face, and I thought of what my mother used to say when anyone tried to make us feel small for being who we were and where we came from. We come from plain people, Gladys. But plain people have survived everything. That woman, my son-in-law's mother, believed, genuinely, that my family's ordinariness was a deficiency, that we were the kind of people you manage and accommodate and keep at a comfortable distance, the way you keep anything inconvenient. She worked very hard for 4 years to shrink my daughter's world, to make her dependent on people who did not deserve dependence, to ensure that when it mattered, my daughter would have nowhere to turn. She was wrong about that. She was wrong about all of it. I still live in the house my grandfather built. The raised beds along the south fence did well this summer, the tomatoes especially. My brother comes up most weekends. He is teaching my granddaughter the names of the birds at the feeder, which she is absorbing at a pace that suggests she intends to be a naturalist, or possibly just someone who pays close attention to things. Both seem fine to me. My daughter lives 40 minutes away, close enough to visit often, far enough to have her own life. She is doing good work. She comes home to her daughter and calls me on Sunday evenings. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, I can hear in her voice the woman she was before 4 years of learning to make herself smaller. She is finding her way back to that woman. That is enough. Plain people. We have worked hard and kept our word, and tended our houses, and grown our gardens in the kinds of towns the magazines do not write about. We are not remarkable in the ways that woman wished she was. But we are still here. And my granddaughter, who carries my mother's name and has her great-grandmother's particular expression of absolute focus, will grow up knowing exactly where she comes from, and knowing, without question, what that is worth.